I just
Yes.
want to welcome everybody. Thank you for being with us today. We're really excited to be here with South Carolina Wildlife Habitat Manager Jay Keck, and he's going to teach us all wonderful things during this session. If you will use the chat box, you are all muted, and if you'll use the chat box for your questions, remember to use all panelists and attendees so that we can all see your questions. And throughout the webinar, I'll interrupt Jay from time to time with your questions. And then if we have more questions at the end, we will answer those. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jay Keck.
I appreciate that. Angie. So today we're going to be talking about, gardening for wildlife. And whenever I think about gardening for something, I think about, taking care of something. And there's this great story about these two cousins. I think the last name was Hall and the last name was Hemingway, not Hemingway, but Hemingway. Two women in the, kind of higher ups, the social ladder in the Boston area back in the day in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they saw the problem of, birds being killed for their feathers. And they just started having tea parties and talking about, hey, let's save these birds. Let's stop wearing, feathers and using feathers in our homes as decorative pieces. And it led to one of the largest conservation laws ever passed in 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And then it eventually led to the creation of the National Audubon Society. So think about that. So that is definitely caring about something else, the animals on this planet. And you think about those feathers at the time, those being worth more than gold or diamonds. And think about the people, I don't know, have you ever talked to anybody and said, hey, you shouldn't do that, or suggest doing something else and to your peers, and then getting that feedback from them? A lot of times it's not positive. But think about telling, folks that, what not to wear. And then think about all the jobs that were lost because of this business that they basically, put out of business. So probably a lot of pushback, probably a lot of hate emails if they would have had emails back in the day, or Instagram or Facebook. I'm sure they would have gotten a lot of flack for that boycott. But we have birds now. Thanks to things like this. So that's, the falling in love with nature is what we want people to do, because when you do that, you take care of it. And so we'll talk about how you do that in your garden. So let me get to the next page. So why would you want to look at birds? That's what I said back around 2001-ish. I was driving down to Bennett's Point with a buddy of mine's dad, and there were a group of people just looking out into the marsh. And this is Bennett's Point right here, or Bear Island rather, right next to it. And he said, I said, what are those people doing on that platform? He said, they're looking at birds. And I said, why in the world would you want to do that? And 20 years later, I'm leading bird walks and talking about birds and talking about habitat and making your property better for birds, right? So I don't know, that it just kind of makes me think about keeping your mind open to new things, especially the things that we have on this planet, because they're so amazing. So my journey to SCWF, I grew up on the south side of Lake Murray. I was always outside hunting and fishing, played a lot of sports, but I really never paid attention to gardening, never paid attention to the birds, to the local ecosystems and how they work. I went to college at Charleston and met my wife in 2003-ish, got married in 2005. She loves snakes. And that's cool. We found 6 snakes for her on Mother's Day. She and I and our 2 boys, and that was really awesome. All non-venomous species, but I think 4 different species we've found, but a total of 6 snakes. Anyhow, she's always encouraged me to get out of the business that I was in, which was insurance, for around 10 or 15 years of my life. And so what happened one day in 2010 or 2011 is a Baltimore Oriole flew in front of me, and it totally changed my life and made me start asking all sorts of questions that I wish I would have started asking, 10 or 15, 20 years beforehand. And it just kind of opened my eyes up to the world. And now I am talking about birds and teaching about gardening for wildlife, and hopefully making this planet a better place to live. So bear with me. We'll get through all this, but I just kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about myself before we kind of dug into this. So how do we garden for wildlife? How do we save wildlife and the planet? We got to fall in love with it. And I just want to show, some nice pictures of some insects that we have and some birds that we have here in this state that you might not know about. Like this golden tortoise beetle. That's a picture that I just took with my iPhone. This red banded leafhopper, gorgeous insects that we have right here on our properties in South Carolina. We got a beautiful crown slug moth caterpillar. Those are here as well. So all these beautiful treasures that are here in our gardens if you have the right things for them. So fall in love with these things. And I just absolutely love this quote from Baba Diem. It says, "In the end, we'll conserve only what we love. We'll love only what we understand, and we'll understand only what we are taught." So hopefully we'll teach you some things that you didn't know, and you'll have a better connection to this planet, and hopefully a better love for it. So just kind of bear with me. We're going to kind of trudge through some of the bad stuff first, but if we're going to garden for wildlife, we want to make sure we do it responsibly, right? So what I want y'all to think about is where your windows are on your property. This is a library here in the Irmo area. As you can see, it reflects beautifully the outdoors. What's bad about it is birds hit the windows pretty consistently. They find around 100 dead birds per year, and those are the ones that they just find. So think about all the ones that are hitting it after hours or before hours, and something, takes it, whether that's another bird or a mammal or a snake, and just, leaves with it. So I'm sure there's more birds that hit that each year and then pass away. And we're working hopefully on a grant that we're going to get to cover that up, so it's not reflecting the outdoors. So when you're thinking about your house and where your garden is, if your garden is right here, next to windows like this, you might want to think about, installing a product like Kaleidoscape. There's other things like Acopian bird savers that are really good. And they'll prevent, or at least, virtually eliminate those window stripes from happening. So if your garden and your property have something like this, think about either moving it or think about covering the windows up with some kind of reflection reducer. More challenges for wildlife that we have. Invasive species, right? Like this Bradford pear that are from Asia that don't really support a nice population of insects. Nandina ligustrum, there's probably hundreds of species that we can talk about that are bad for wildlife. Habitat loss and fragmentation of the land is probably the largest driver of wildlife decline. Think about this neighborhood right here, which is in just outside of Columbia. I took this about a month or two ago. And so just think about these 300 homes or so, 400 homes, if each one would plant just one or two milkweed, butterfly weed plants, one oak tree. Think about all the hundreds of different kinds of caterpillars that would be there. Right now, there's not really a lot going on, and I'm not sure if they have anybody in this neighborhood that's really, encouraging others to garden. So that's a big challenge for us. But other challenges are just the disconnection to nature that we have. I'm 42. I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, and a lot of people my age I just say life is for them Chick-fil-A and travel sports. So they go to their restaurants and then they go to sports. They go to restaurants, they go to sports, and with some eating and some school in between, or some sleeping and some school in between. And so there's no connection to nature. And again, there's no connection, you're not going to care for it. You're not going to love it. So video games, social media. How many of y'all love seeing a kid just staring at a screen? You know, probably nobody's raising their hand right now. Now I understand kids can be a little loud sometimes, you know, and challenging. And so sometimes a screen can give them, or give y'all or an adult, you know, some peace, at least temporary. But you know, I don't really like seeing this. So get them outside, get them looking up, get them looking out, and exploring. Again, internet kind of goes in with social media and video games, and then fear. And we'll talk about the fear in a little bit. Again, just kind of bear with me a little bit, and then we'll get to the gardening part. But think about domestic cats. This is a study that was done, I think, in 2014 by the Smithsonian Institution and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They kill up from 1 billion to 4 billion birds per year in the U.S. And then think about the mammals that they're also taking away from the local ecosystems. 6 billion to 22 billion small mammals, and then hundreds of millions of reptiles and amphibians. So, you know, these tree frogs that we have here in South Carolina, this plain-bellied water snake. The first copperhead I ever saw growing up on the south side of Lake Murray was one that my cat, you know, drug into the garage. These golden crown kinglets that come down here from Canada and the Northeast for the winter, you know, those are being caught by a lot of the cats that we have if we allow them to stay outside. So we always ask, if you are a cat owner, to keep those cute little guys inside. All right, so we're gonna start getting into it here. What does your yard look like, or in your neighborhoods around you? You know, what do those neighborhoods look like? And I always like to ask this question: if these were paintings, these 3 pictures were paintings, which one would you want hanging in your house? I really doubt somebody's going to choose this right here, possibly, since it does have some trees and you know, some I don't know, some positive things to it. You know, maybe they would choose that, but I would imagine most of us are going to choose this. But why do our yards mostly look like this if we wouldn't even consider hanging that on our property, or on a property in our house, as a piece of art? You know, this is much more calming. It's prettier, but look at all these levels. You have turf grass here, which is going to support a few insects. All right, then you have this taller grass here, and then you have these small shrubs, medium-sized trees, and then you have our really large trees. Each level is going to support a different variety of wildlife. So that's what I want y'all to start doing on your own property, if you can. So gardening for wildlife, you know, think about what most gardens look like, or yards look like. They look like this. And this is from a buddy of mine's house. He purchased this about 3 years ago, and this is what it looked like when he purchased it. And this is what it looks like now. Now, it took him 3 years. It's not something that can be done just overnight. But he took it from having, these are camellias, I think, and this was Nandina, I believe, you know, a highly invasive plant, and maybe some, I don't know, maybe some kind of roses here that are kind of spindly, possibly some mums, you know. So we're seeing four different types of plants and turf grass. So I guess 5, right? And now look at what the yard looks like. And it doesn't look wild. It doesn't look unkept. There's organization to it, and it looks absolutely beautiful. But he plants around 60 to 70% native plants to some exotic species that are not invasive. So imagine how much wildlife he has just flying around. I saw my first Richland County longwing or zebra longwing butterfly flitting around his yard whenever I was visiting him one day. That's the first and only one that I've seen, excuse me, in Colombia. And they were visiting all his flowers. They were visiting his native plants. And imagine all those insects that are up in the air, you know, above his property, that are being gobbled up by things like purple martins, by other swallows, by other birds, warblers, by tanagers, that are either visiting here, you know, just temporarily as they pass further north, through our state to go breed, or they're residents here. You know, think about the brown-headed nuthatch that would be hiding in these, you know, living in these pine trees if there's cavities. So to get a garden like this, first it takes patience. And then it takes, you know-how, and we'll give you some good resources, how to learn how to garden like this. And he also taught a great gardening segment. It's called, I think, From Abyss to Abundance, I believe, on our YouTube page. But it has this picture, so you can go to SCWF's page on YouTube and find his talk. And he's a horticulturalist at the Riverbank Zoo. So great guy, and he knows a lot, and I'd recommend y'all watching that. But you can use compost just to kind of sweeten the garden. All right. So I just got some, and I just kind of dusted my plants with it. All that goodness goes down into the soil and gives those plants something to feed from. Microlife fertilizer, if you are going to use a fertilizer, you know, it's a nice organic kind. Compost tea, putting compost in some water and letting it sit there for a day or two, and then using that on your plants can be a really good way to vitalize those plants. And a drip watering system, that's what he uses. He just waters once a week, and that's on a Sunday, I think, for 2 or 3 hours. And it really encourages those roots to go nice and deep. He doesn't water, you know, every day or every 2 days, which encourages shallow roots. He just waters once a week, and it encourages really deep roots to be produced. So just some really good tips that he has if you want to watch that webinar, which is on our YouTube channel. So insects, and I like to include arachnids too, are what E.O. Wilson calls the little things that run the world. So all this that you're seeing here is wildlife, but it is also food for other wildlife. So the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar, gorgeous animal that we are lucky enough to have here. If you have spicebush, guess what? You're probably going to encourage that or have that animal visit your property. Green lynx spiders. Pretty common animal, and I'm not a big spider guy, but we have a ton of them, and I love them because I do know that my bluebirds that are, you know, probably on their second brood right now are eating a lot of those spiders. And then we have something called a snowberry clearwing caterpillar that loves to gobble up our coral honeysuckle that we have on our property. So, you know, you plant the right plants, you're going to get these spectacular, these beautiful insects or arachnids or, you know, other animals that you might not know exist. You just have to plant.
Hey, Jay.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, the picture of the clearwing caterpillar reminded me of we've had some tomato hornworms, and we've seen them be made the host for parasitic wasps.
Yeah.
So here's my question. The tomato hornworms will eat our tomatoes, but if we leave them in our environment, do we let them stay, or do we make them go?
Well, listen, if they were just completely annihilating, if they were out of balance on your property, maybe try to move some. But, you know, nature should, as long as it's balanced, right, in that area, nature should kind of control their population. So yeah, the first time I saw that happen was on my tomatoes while I was living in Pittsburgh before I knew any of this. And they took care of them. You know, did I have a couple that nibbled on my tomatoes? Sure. But, you know, I had 2 or 3 at least that I remember seeing that had those, you know, the eggs on them. So I would just kind of play it by ear and just kind of see how they do. But those wasps, you have them there. So those wasps should make it a nice little balance there.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So again, this is food for wildlife, and it's beautiful, right? Green orb weavers. Again, not a spider person, but you do have to kind of appreciate that spider's beauty right there. This is probably maybe a female stag beetle, but we have a bunch of different types of beetles here in South Carolina. But one of my youngest son's favorite thing to do is find beetles. And milkweed assassin bug, you know, it's going to be hunting other insects, but it too is food for other insects and other wildlife. So, what can you install in your garden? Some of my favorite plants are these here. So goldenrod, is a host plant to over 100 different types of butterflies and moths. So all that means a host plant is something that a caterpillar can eat. So goldenrod is probably the #1 perennial in our area. I think here in South Carolina, or at least in my area here in Chapin, they're a host plant to almost 80 different types of caterpillars. So throughout the entire state, it's probably closer to 100. In the entire eastern United States, it's 100 plus. I think it's around 115 types of moths and butterflies. Aster, New England aster is great. New York aster, there's a bunch of other different types of asters, but that's another one. It's a close second. I think there are around 109 different species can eat those leaves or flowers, right? So an aster is fantastic to incorporate on your property. They both bloom usually during the fall time whenever the monarchs are coming down during migration. Joe Pye weed is another great one. And here in my area, they're host plant to around 32 different types of caterpillars. And then the common violet, I think it's a host plant to over 40, but in my area, again, it's around 25 plus. So, it doesn't have to be a huge plant. It can be as small as a violet, and you're providing food for caterpillars. And remember, it's not just the birds that I love so much, and so many of us love so much that eat caterpillars. Other insects eat them. Sometimes other caterpillars eat caterpillars. And you have reptiles that eat caterpillars. Even think about a copperhead, that'll eat a caterpillar, but garter snakes and many other snakes will eat caterpillars. Frogs will, toads will. Then you've got your mammals that will eat caterpillars, and even humans, and not in our country really, but in other countries eat caterpillars, and they have higher fat content and protein content than I think steak even. So really nutritious food that we need to start providing more on our property.
Jay, we have a question about Joe Pye weed. Do you know if it's also available, or does it grow along the coast or in the low country?
That is a good question. Coastal, I'm not sure, but that's just a quick Google search. And you know what, that y'all have a great Native Plant Society branch down there, the Low Country Native Plant Society. So I would reach out to them to see if there is a variety maybe that is more, compliant to those conditions down there. But I know, in the Midlands up, we don't really have a problem. I'm not as sure down, by the coast if it's as viable down there. So yeah, just check with the Native Plant Society branch in the Low Country, and they should be able to help you. Roots and Shoots Nursery too, which is in West Ashley. They probably would be a good resource for you too. So I would call them and ask them if they sell it or not. And if they do sell it, what their thoughts are on that. But some of these species here are some more really great caterpillar producers. If they're not fantastic caterpillar producers, this Panchnanthemum species, the Flexuosum and the Muticum are great varieties of that. I don't think they support a ton of different caterpillars, maybe 12, 20 or so species, but the pollinators will just come to those flowers like crazy, the bees and the wasps and the butterflies and the moths. So really great plant to install, to include on your property. But boneset, which I think is a pretty close relative to Joe Pye weed, is a host plant to around 32. Ironweed 21. Wild geranium, is up there. Lead plant, it's a great plant to install. And then you start thinking about our vines like Virginia creeper, 27 in my area, 27 different types of moths and butterflies eat those leaves. Coral honeysuckle, oaks support, again, in my area, over 400 different types of caterpillars. Willows, over 200. Black cherry, and that also includes, the cherries also include choke cherry. That includes, our Chickasaw plum. But that's 300 plus species of caterpillars that you're going to support if you plant those, install those plants. Sunflowers, so Helianthus, around 57 species in our area. And then serviceberry, a great, I would say small to medium tree, supports 77 different types of caterpillars. So, they, the leaves take the energy from the sun, they make food, and then all of a sudden these caterpillars are eating it. And then, so all the sun's energy is being dispersed through these caterpillars to everything else. So, but there's also protein, there's also fat, there's also sugars, there's the carotenoids. So, when we talk about gardening for wildlife, I mean, we're really talking about gardening for insects, because that's what feeds everything else. So consider that in your garden. But these are all taken, I'm pretty sure, except for this one. This was on a kayak paddle, this hickory horn devil, which is harmless. I don't know if you've ever seen a regal moth before, but Google it. It's an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous moth. But that was on persimmon right here. This is on our black willow in our yard. This is on oak, I think a red oak species, and this was on our blueberry. So spotted titana, spiny oakworm, which is a really, really pretty moth as well. And then the white marked tussock moth, which isn't too fancy of a moth, but its caterpillar is absolutely stunning. And you do have to be careful. I love taking pictures of caterpillars and only picking up the ones that I know aren't going to bother me, but there are some out there that will give you a nice little sting. So if you don't know, don't touch it. And then we think about what they turn into as adults after they go through the metamorphosis. So beautiful Luna moth, and I've seen a northern cardinal, a beautiful male northern cardinal, just find and tackle an adult Luna moth and consume it. Think about all that fat, think about all that protein and nutrition that was in that one insect. But sweet gum is one of its host plants. Tulip poplar isn't a species that really supports a ton of different butterflies and moths. I think it's a host plant to around 20 or 30, and it's a huge tree. Different types of caterpillars, so not huge, but it is a host plant to our state butterfly, the eastern tiger swallowtail. Zebra swallowtail, if you want those, plant pawpaw. The female zebra swallowtail, I don't know how they know, but they know that they can lay their eggs on that pawpaw leaf, and that her babies will be able to consume and digest those chemical components of that leaf whenever they hatch. Monarchs are supported by milkweed, and most of us know that. And then the Gulf fritillary and other butterflies are supported by the passion flower vine, or I should say the caterpillars are supported by it too. So a few other good species right there. And we're just going to keep on going on this just for a little bit longer. Cloudless sulfur here. We've got the Gulf fritillary caterpillar right here. We saw the adult on the previous screen, but that's the orange caterpillar with black spikes. They're harmless. So, if you're curious and you touch one, that's totally fine. Just be careful with it. This is an unknown species that I haven't identified yet, but it is bird food all the same. And this is probably another Datana species, monarch on milkweed here, yellow bear. We have a unicorn prominent, which is right here mimicking a dead edge of a leaf, which I think is pretty amazing on an oak. And this is a spiny rose caterpillar that is on river birch, and this was river birch as well, and that was on the same tree. And then we have pipevine swallowtail. So if you want, more caterpillars, if you want more wildlife, plant native plants to have more caterpillars. So again, this was river birch. River birch is a fantastic tree. It's probably around the 150 to 200 plus range when we're talking about the number of different species of caterpillars that it supports. And I want to say this was some kind of in the pea family. I can't really remember, but the National Wildlife Federation has a great native plant finder that can help you find the plants in your area that support the most caterpillars. And we'll talk about that in a second. So when you attract moths and butterflies, you will have more of these. So we talked about the spice bush plant, and that's it right here. And the caterpillar that it supports, which is really a neat looking. But if you want that caterpillar and you want that butterfly, plant the spice bush. I don't think spice bush really supports that many varieties of caterpillars. It might be in the 10 to 15 range, but it's still something out there. And we need to incorporate those as well. Viburnum, 89 plus. So that's a heavy producer of caterpillars. native blueberries. I love sparkleberry. But these are the rabbit eye varieties. So they're cultivated, but they still have those components that they can digest. So native blueberries are fantastic. Baptisia species up here are native, and they are wonderful at supporting not only caterpillars, but the birds that eat them. And all 9 of these birds have been, well, I'm sorry, 8 out of the 9 have been seen on my property. The only one that I haven't seen on my property is the prothonotary warbler, just because we don't have, a swamp or a lake that we live on. And that's the kind of habitat that it likes. But so far on our property here in Chapin, which is a little bit less than 3 acres, we've had around 107 different species. But we're loaded with native plants, especially native oaks, which again, support hundreds and hundreds of different types of caterpillars. If you want more wildlife on your property, install a water feature. If you have the financial resources to do so, create, some kind of flowing water. If you're like me and you're limited on your financial resources, just put a little bubbler in your bird bath, and that'll draw even more. If you're somewhere in between, you can install a nice little pond like this guy did in 96, which is in Greenwood County. But these are all the birds that he's seen. Well, not all of them, just a few of the many that he's seen around his little pond. But he's also sent me pictures of snakes, plain-bellied water snakes, which are great to have because they're bird food too, right? Frogs that he's had. But it's inexpensive for the most part, and it's pretty. And so you can see his chairs out there by the other bird bath right here, and he's got some bird feeders. And then you get things like this bay-breasted warbler. You get these Tennessee warblers and these Cape May warblers coming through. And look at this white-crowned sparrow, a bird that's that I haven't been able to see yet, even though I do, a lot of the things that he does on his property. It's just he gets them every single year, but we don't get them here, or at least I haven't seen them yet. So make sure you have that water feature. I just met someone who made basically a stream on his property that's around 300 feet long, and I just think, man, if you can do that, you will have birds almost immediately. And other wildlife. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about, so I have, our Baptisia just stopped blooming, and I didn't know if I should leave the stems, the long tall stems, if they are something that is eaten, or if we should just chop those off, the flowering parts of after they're done.
I always like to keep all my stuff on until if you have to chop it off, wait until winter and then chop it off, maybe 6, 8, 10 inches from the ground and stack it somewhere. Because a lot of times, I don't know if they use Baptisia species a lot, but goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, boneset, a lot of those wasps will lay their eggs in those stems. They'll put pollen in there, and then that larva, will eat that and then become the adults, the following year. So if you take those out and throw them away, you're throwing away the next year's, brood, I guess, or population. So if you do cut something off, have a place for it on your property, bundle it up and just make sure they can hatch from there at a later time. But I wouldn't cut it off right now. I would probably wait until, late fall or winter to cut it off. But if I did, I would keep it on the property. I wouldn't get rid of it.
Does yours rebloom?
Yes, every single year. Yep, it's a
perennial.
But
only once a year?
Yep. It's one of the first plants that blooms each spring, which that's a good thing to talk about too. So you want things to bloom throughout the year if you can, but starting late February, early March, and then by the end of March you should have things like the Baptisia species blooming. And then, you get into summer and you have things like the purple coneflower blooming, and then you get into fall, and then you have the things like the asters and the goldenrod. So try to install plants that will bloom, at the early spring, kind of late spring, summer, and then fall. So you have food for pollinators throughout the year. Winter everything kind of shuts down, but there are some things that are still blooming from time to time around.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And I'll just want to remind everybody, if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box for us, and we'll get those answered for you.
All right, so when we're talking about wildlife on your property, so we kind of covered, producing a bunch of caterpillars, which is food, and then water. But think about the cover that that wildlife need. Our tick consumers, our number one tick consumers in America, the opossums, they need a place to kind of hang out, right? They need shelter just like we do. So, I know several people that have screech owl boxes that have opossums, but opossums are fantastic to have on your property. They eat snakes, they eat other mammals. They're great predators. They eat amphibians, and they eat a bunch of ticks. There's studies that have been done that show opossums eat around 4,000 to 5,000 ticks per year, and they live around 4 to 5 years. So think about how many ticks that is. So great animal to have on your property. Think about installing a brush pile. And you might get something cool like a skunk. And one of the favorite snacks of a great horned owl is a skunk. And I've seen plenty of pictures of barred owls eating opossums. So, it's the circle of life, and it can all happen on your property, whether you have, 3 acres like me, or 800 acres, or, a 20th of an acre. You can do this on a 20th of an acre on a smaller scale, but you can still do something. You get cool things like the eastern box turtle. And, this is a picture that I took of a fawn under some wax myrtle on our property. That wasn't too far from one of our brush piles that we have. But we have around 7 or 8 brush piles on our property, and there's always something good around them. Love looking around them, love taking the boys out there and searching for things. Leave the leaves, because even some of our moths and butterflies, the caterpillars eat the dead leaves. They choose, for whatever reason, that's how they evolve. They choose to eat. I don't know if they choose, but they eat the dead leaves rather than the living leaves on the plant. So leave the leaves. There's a lot of food in there. There's a lot of cover in there. There's a lot of insects, and then you'll see the birds and other animals, searching those leaves for insects and other critters like spiders. Even scorpions, are food for a lot of birds. Even the great horned owl loves eating scorpions. And create holes for bees, not beans, bees. So, this is in our yard as well. We have this nice little area that's been bare since we moved in here 6 years ago when we built. And it wasn't intentional, but it was always bare. And the first spring that we had, I just noticed a bunch of bees going in and out of these holes. And every single year for the last 6 years, the same exact spot, we have these bumblebees. So, consider doing that. I'm asking you to leave the leaves on one side, and then asking you on the other to leave a patch, just free of leaves, free of debris, for the bees. But it's all about a balanced approach. Wax myrtle, eastern red cedar, native holly, those are all great trees, that provide cover year round. And not only that, but they're a host plant to dozens and dozens of different caterpillars. And they all produce berries. So three great plants to install on your property if you have the room for it. So let's talk about log and rock piles now too. Go ahead, Angie.
Hey, I'm back. We have a question about succession planting. Where can folks find more information about garden designs that would, include those spring, summer, fall bloomers in
Oh, yeah, sure.
information?
There's a great website, and it's a nursery, and it's called New Moon Nursery. And they have the bloom times of each plant that they sell. Now, they are wholesale, but it's a great resource just for you to go on and kind of study, the plants that are in your area, and when they bloom. Is there a great place to go that tells you, that gives you a bunch of native plants and when they bloom? I'm not sure. I'll have to investigate the National Wildlife Federation, but that's something that I've just done on my own through just kind of research. I don't think I really have a go-to place other than that New Moon Nurseries. I wish they weren't wholesale, but they are. But they have a ton of great information for you. Just go to their plant lists, just click on native plants, and they have full native plants, complete native plants, and then they have cultivars too, which I try to stay just pure native. But I guess the cultivars are being debated right now whether or not they are as good as the pure natives that are out there. But they have both. And they'll tell you, what they like, whether it's shade, moist or dry, what time they bloom. So if you have a plant, or if you have a list of 20 plants, you could probably plug all of them in there and find them if they are, natives. But I would just I just do my own research on that just to kind of see when they bloom. So sorry, I don't have a good answer for you, but New Moon Nursery's website is probably the one that I would use. So log and rock piles, you think about some of these beetles that we have here in South Carolina. This gorgeous stag beetle we found while we were leading a bird walk at Congaree Creek Heritage Preserve outside of Columbia, but a great beetle. But some of these beetles, the larva, it takes them, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to mature to an adult. So they need rotting logs. So, there's a property up the road from us that I think they have around 70 acres. And the one of the husband or wife, they don't like trees that fall and just stay there. So, when we look from the road onto the property, there is not one tree that is down on their property. And I'm talking, 60 to 70 acres. And think about all those bees, all those wasps, all those beetles, all those insects that don't have homes because they like it clean. They like the way it looks without debris on the ground, but that's not how the world works. That's how we like it sometimes. But, that's why I need them to fall in love with these stag beetles, these triceratops beetles, these Eastern Hercules beetles, or at least have their grandkids or kids fall in love with them. So they keep those things. It makes wildlife abundant, makes it survive in the area. So think about adding logs and rock piles to your property. But the thing that we always get pushback from is installing rock or log piles because of snakes. So, what do you think about them? Are you scared of them? Do you dislike them? And if you do dislike them or are fearful of them, when did that start? We started going into schools before COVID was a thing. And I would say 90 to 95% of the kids wanted to touch the snakes, whether it was a room of 10 or 100. I would say just from the several visits that we did, I would say around 90% at least wanted to touch the snakes, and they had smiles on their faces and they were excited and, almost jostling for position to get to the snakes. And, then I did a class at a business that supports us, and about 100 higher up managers, hardly anybody wanted to touch the snakes or see the snakes. Actually, the HR guy told me to keep all the snakes, and they were all non-venomous inside the containers. So, where does that fear start? I hear a lot of times that it starts from the grandparents as kids. I hear this all the time. Hey, whenever we go to our grandparents' house, we saw a snake, granddad will come out there and kill it or whatever. And grandma would yell and scream. And all of a sudden this impressionable kid, doesn't like snakes, but snakes are food for everything else. That 7 or 6 foot rat snake, 7 or 6 foot rat snake didn't start off as a 6 or 7 foot rat snake. It started off as a small baby, which is eaten by, even bluebirds will eat snakes when they're small. And we have plenty of species that are small, even as adults. So snakes are, just think of them as bird food. So this disconnect, sorry, I had to move something so I could see it. That phrase, the only good snake is a dead snake, is something that we hear, quite a bit, and it drives me crazy, but it's a statement just driven out of fear. This juvenile corn snake was sent to me at this picture right here from a friend in Lexington. And she said some guy just came up to her front yard while he was driving, stopped his truck and got out and killed it. And he said, "Hey, I just killed that copperhead for you." It looks nothing like a copperhead. So, if I could just ask that guy to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to learn his snakes, it's not hard. There's not that many. We have around 30 to 40 different snakes here in South Carolina. So he lets them live. Would be really great. But even better, if he would learn his snakes and learn how they fit into the ecosystem, he might just let every single one of them live, not just the non-venomous ones, because they all serve a purpose. And just kind of drive home that point. Bees and wasps are the things that are, in terms of wildlife, that are, I guess, the deadliest, but those aren't the ones that are giving us a problem when we're planning for wildlife, with the pollinator gardens. Those are the social ones. And it typically affects people that have allergies. Other mammals, dogs, are way higher than snakes. And think about the roads of South Carolina. That would probably be the riskiest place to be in South Carolina or on our roads. So, snakes are a small problem. So will you take some time to learn about snakes? If you're not getting outdoors because of that fear, you're staying disconnected. And here are just some of the gorgeous snakes that we have, like this eastern or king snake rather, that will eat this copperhead. And these copperheads almost always have these Hershey Kiss designs on them. And no other snake that I can think of here, other than the water moccasin, its close cousin, has those. But they're both venomous. So if you see something with a Hershey Kiss design, stay away from it. Ringneck snake, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous snake, but tiny. And this is all bird food. Red-bellied snake, tiny, bird food, and beautiful. So, things that I would love for y'all to do. If you haven't read it yet, Nature's Best Hope. These books down here by Douglas Ptolemy. Nature's Best Hope is this book right here. Fantastic, fantastic book. His first book, Bringing Nature Home, talks about all this. He's a brilliant entomologist from the University of Delaware, PhDer, really, really smart guy. And I would recommend you reading those books twice. Read it once and read it again with a highlighter and start incorporating those plants onto your property. Install those window strike prevention products. If you do have a problem at your house, install some of those products that I was telling you about before. Kaleidoscape, Acopian bird savers. They'll really reduce, if not 100% eliminate, those bird strikes from your property. Drink bird-friendly coffee, Birds and Beans coffee. 100% of their beans come from shade-grown coffee farms, and those canopies offer a place in the wintertime for the birds that we see here during the spring and summer, or a lot of the birds that we see here. Create a wildlife garden on your property or a public place. Get it certified with the National Wildlife Federation. A lot of the schools around South Carolina don't have, a lot of money. So think about kind of adopting a school and installing a garden over there. Just get permission from them first. Take a family or a friend on a nature walk. Get them connected. Get them to fall in love with nature so they start caring for it. And then the easiest thing to do is just install nest boxes. But again, do it in a way that's responsible. If you have 5 cats on your property and you don't want to keep them inside, don't provide a home for birds because they will become cat food. Other resources that we have, allaboutbirds.org, butterfliesandmoths.org, great places to go to learn more about your moths, butterflies, and birds. If you want to learn more about snakes, just go to the Savannah River Ecology Laboratory website. Fantastic place to go. The Native Plant Finder, just Google National Wildlife Federation Native Plant Finder. You can put your zip code in it, and it'll show you what plants support the most butterflies and moths as caterpillars in your area. And then a great book, I think I have that here too, by the National Wildlife Federation, and we sell it. attracting birds, butterflies, and other backyard wildlife. Great resources to have, and just kind of highly recommend those. Yes, ma'am.
So we had a couple questions come through. Someone asked if snakes are rare now too.
Snakes are just great at hiding. Now, have they declined? Yeah, they've declined. A lot of them have. I know some places are really losing their eastern king snakes. I've never seen a corn snake in the wild. I know they get killed all the time because people think that they are copperheads, even though they don't look like copperheads at all after you take some time to learn it. But yeah, habitat loss is really impacting everything. They might not be as, being impacted as much as some of our birds are, but I don't have any data, there. But I do know that there are certain species that are in trouble. Think about the indigo snake, that's reduced in huge numbers over the last 20 or 30 years.
Oh, great, thanks. And then another question came through. They wanted to know if organic coffee is also bird friendly.
Well, you can have organic coffee, but still chop down every tree around that farm. So, the Birds and Beans coffee is organic, it's free trade, and it's 100% shade grown. So, and you can even advertise as shade grown with having as little as 30% shade grown beans in your bag of coffee. So, the ones at Birds and Beans are 100%. Or 100% of them come from shade grown coffee farms. So, I would just go on YouTube and Google that and see if you can find some videos about it. And you'll see pictures of what shade grown coffee farms look like compared to sun grown farms, which again, you can have a sun grown coffee farm, which basically is just coffee. It's a monoculture, just one plant through, whether that's 10 acres or 10,000 acres of property. And that's just horrible for wildlife. So think about, making the jump to something like Birds and Beans. They're not the only one that supplies 100% shade grown coffee, but it was one of the first out there, and they're organic and they're fair trade. So I really like that company a lot. Any other questions?
Well, we did there's another question about wanting a request for us to share the resources. So we'll let you all know at this time that we will be posting this video on our website, and it'll be on YouTube. It'll be available in a day or two, and we will send you all the link to your email so you can get it there. And of course, all of these resources are listed throughout the website, and some of them are also on our website under the habitat section.
Yeah, and if you go to our native plant section on our website, you can find the nurseries around South Carolina that sell native plants. Here in the Midlands, our go-to is Mill Creek Greenhouse and Wingard's Nursery. And a lot of times, if they don't have something on their property at that time, they can order it for you. So, I purchased 10 or 15 plants of the Pinnathemum flexuosum, which doesn't spread as much, and I think 10 or 12 ironweed, so New York ironweed. So they didn't have it on the property, but I just asked if they could do it, and the next shipment that they came in, they just included that. So that's just a little tip. They have a great place in a couple great places in the upper state and a couple great places down in the lower state as well. So no matter where you live in South Carolina, you should be able to find a place that can supply you with native plants. And you can almost always find what you want online too.
Thanks. Someone wants to know what kind of bird that is.
Oh, that's a beautiful indigo bunting. That Baltimore Oriole I told you at the beginning of the presentation, that's the one that's the first bird I ever saw that just kind of blew me away. And then a couple of weeks later, north of Pittsburgh, I was working, I used to handle injury claims. I was working a claim, and an indigo bunting was in a tree, and I pulled my car to the side and just stared at it for 5 minutes. Well, it seemed like 5 minutes. But yeah, that's a beautiful male. And those are here in South Carolina. Just kind of listen for its song, which is the mnemonic is where, what, see it. So it always sings in twos, but this isn't a bird class. But listen to go to our YouTube channel, go to my bird classes that focus on sound. And if you learn the sound of the bird, you'll find it. But they're breeding right now. Just go to weedy fields and right of ways, where the power lines kind of cut through, and you should be able to find that bird. It's still relatively common, but one of the prettiest birds, I think, in the world right here in South Carolina.
Great, thanks. Well, does that wrap it up for you, Jay?
Wraps it up for me.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all this wonderful information, and thanks to all of you for sharing this hour with us. And if you enjoyed our webinar, again, go to our website. You can donate online and find a whole library full of other webinars that you can enjoy for free. And thank you again to Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, our sponsor for today's webinar. And if you, we're just getting lots of thank yous in and no other questions, Jay. So, but yeah, if you do have other questions, feel free to just email us at any time. And we look forward to seeing you or hearing from all of you at our next webinar.
All right. Thanks a lot, y'all.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Andy.